Okay, it being 6:30, I'm going to call this joint meeting of the Chelmsford Select Board and Planning Board to order. Would you all please join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so Evan or Paul, did you want to introduce this or no? Okay.
No, don't want to.
They need no introduction.
As I understand it, the purpose of this meeting is so that we can get an update from the Trammell Crow team on the proposed development for 255 Princeton Street. For the record, from the Chelmsford Planning Board, we have participating Timothy Shanahan, Deirdre Connolly, Nancy Arroway, Michael Raisbeck, Paul McDougall, and Henry Parlee. And for the Select Board, we have Pat Wojcik, Ken LaFave, Mark Carrata, and myself, Virginia Timmons. Also from the town, we have at present at the meeting Town Manager Paul Cohen, Community Development Director Evan Belansky, and Town Council Paul Haverty. And joining us is also Select Board Member George Dixon. Did I miss anybody from the town side? Okay, with that, I will turn it over to however you guys would like to start, and I do have your slides here whenever you're ready.
Oh, sure, thank you. Good evening, members of both boards and everybody else in attendance.
I'm just going to ask every speaker, give your name and address or function. Or
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
My name's Melissa Robbins. I'm from the law firm of Farrell and Robbins. I'm here as counsel. I'll let everybody else introduce themselves just so everybody can know who's on the panel.
Good evening, David Hedison, Chelmsford Housing Authority Choice, Inc.
Good evening, Mark Baranski, Trammell Crow Residential.
Good evening, Mason Brunick, Trammell Crow Residential.
Thank you. Just for the record, Erica Clifford from the Planning Board has also joined us over Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in an effort to stick with the agenda that I know is posted this evening, I think what I'd like to do first is just give an overview of what's happened since the last meeting. We can kind of try to follow the agenda that's posted online. I think what I'd like to do is let Mark go through some of the slides that are in the board's packet. I know that they were also put in the Dropbox, just so that you can know what's happened on site since the last time we met.
Yes. So thank you all for your time. Just to give some context and how we'll be presenting this. After our last meeting with the joint boards, we were directed to go out and meet with the abutters and our neighbors and understand their issues and concerns. We had 3 meetings with those parties. The first solely with the Meadowood community, the second with all other neighbors and abutters exclusive of the Meadowood community, and then the third with the Meadowood community again.
One second.
Sports radio.
I can't. Chelmsford Telemedia, could you please mute that participant?
I agree that the Patriots game plan is important. In any case, so those meetings were very helpful for us. It revealed things that we didn't know, and that it gave us an opportunity to respond and act on those issues. What we'll be presenting to you and what you have in front of you is the presentations that we gave on those 3 meetings.
Mark, could you hang on, please? Whoever's on Rosie Marie's iPad, I need you to mute. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
So we'll be more or less. What is going on?
Rosie Marie's iPad, could you also turn off your video, please? Thank you.
Sorry.
Does everybody remember where we left off?
Okay. So we'll more or less be cycling through the presentation that we presented to all the neighbors and abutters. There are a couple caveats that I'll present to you now. From these meetings, we changed details of the project. So in some cases, what you'll see is the original proposed site plan or condition, and then revisions. And I think it's really important that we're transparent in conveying how things are changing, why they're changing, and also to give comfort to those parties that are very interested in this, that those changes are being recorded and being incorporated in the project. We also have our members of our consultant team on the call, and I'll ask them to speak, to do a brief presentation on their areas of expertise when those come up. So if we go to really the next page, please. That's just the table of contents that we kind of used as to create some structure in our presentations. Next, please. Next, please. As I think everyone knows, this overall project proposal is really I guess I'd call it a joint venture, although maybe that legally isn't the term. But there will be a component of the project that is being developed by Trammell Crow Residential, and there will be an important component of the project that will be developed by Choice, SCG, with David Hedison here to speak on. And here's some information I believe was presented in past meetings to these joint boards on the members of the various project teams. If you could skip to the next site plan. So again, at this stage, I think everyone's very familiar with the location of the site. Certainly, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. But if we can move to the next slide. This identifies the buildings that have been demolished by the landowner, Alice Choi and her party. These were buildings of various vintages, primarily brick structures, Victorian, 3.5, 4 stories. Those have all been demolished and those sites have been cleared. If you go to the next slide, please. This was our original sort of site plan, and I think we may have even presented this at one of the first meetings. You'll note that there are 2 4-story structures comprising 282 units. There are 2 3-story walk-up structures, each comprising 24 units, 10 townhomes, and then at the Bruyette and Princeton intersection was the proposed Choice location, 3 stories, 54 units. If you go to the next slide, you'll see we made a revision. I think it's pretty straightforward. The geometry of the Choice building doesn't lend itself for a straight path, but it really makes a ton of sense on a radius, which we're already incorporating into the site plan. So we moved the Choice structure up and kind of flip-flopped it with the townhomes. Nothing too radically different about that. I will make note as we get further into the presentation that in the bottom corner, and unfortunately it's not well ID'd, there is a proposed sewage treatment plant. As you know, there is a moratorium.
Am I on the right slide for that?
Yeah, it's. I apologize. It's in the bottom. It's not as well identified as it probably should have been.
Right in here.
Thank you. Yeah. We will be building a private wastewater treatment plant, and our consultant will speak to the details of that. It was originally located probably 60, 70 feet from the lot line and 140 feet from the nearest abutter. Based on some of our meetings with those abutters, they felt that it was too close. We heard that, and we've since moved it about 80 feet further north, and that is represented on the next slide. So the final slide represents our current iteration of the site plan. It's worth noting that based on feedback from our development head or technical review committee meeting about a month and a half back, Life Safety Fire mentioned that while the 3-story structures are allowed per code, that they really weren't comfortable with that from a life safety perspective. So what you're seeing right now on the plan is 2 separate buildings. Those are intended to be walk-up structures. We are going to change that, and we're going to change that in one of 2 ways. I cannot tell you precisely how yet, but they will be either we will put those 2 buildings closer together and put an elevator core that will service both buildings. So you'll have 2 3-story buildings with an elevator service in the midst, or we would look at a 4-story structure there for the same amount of units. So we're responding to the feedback from the fire department on their concerns with a 3-story elevator supported building. But it isn't reflected quite yet in the plan.
Someone's bombing this meeting.
We're not seeing it, Sue.
All right. Could-
Go ahead.
Go ahead, okay. If you go to the next slide, please, we have a summary, and again, this summary is in line with summaries that we presented to the joint boards in the past. As I mentioned a bit earlier, there's 2 4-story elevator-supported buildings comprising 282 units. Again, the 3-story, which I just mentioned, 48 units and 2 structures. They will be joined in some way by an elevator, or it'll be a 4-story structure. 10 townhomes, and then the choice
Mark,
structure.
could you hang on, please?
Sure.
Chelmsford Telemedia, could you please disable the chat and dismiss the individual who's using it, please? Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. David, would you like to speak a bit more about the details of the choice building and its tenant mix?
Okay, sure. So we're looking at a 3-story development, all 1 bedrooms. The unit size is around 600, consistent with all the other senior developments we've done in Chelmsford, around 600, between 600 and 700 square feet. And it's a center corridor entrance with an elevator in the middle, and also a secondary elevator. So we'll be actually putting in 2 elevators in that structure because of the senior population.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you go to the next slide, please. We're going to jump into consultant reports. The first report, and this has been presented to the board, it should be in your package, is a traffic study that was prepared by MDM Transportation Consultants. As well, there should be a letter from the Traffic Advisory Committee accompanying our report. Bob Michaud is principal of MDM. Bob, could you speak, please?
Yes, this is Dan Dume with MDM. Here for Bob tonight. But we did a back to the view. Here we go. Just to make sure I can see your screen. So we did a full traffic impact access report for this project, studying the 2 gateway intersections on either side, signalized at Route 4, and then down at the Wood Street intersection signal, and then the Princeton Street at the site driveway across from Brulette. We did peak morning counts 7 to 9, 4 to 6 during the peak commuter periods. Those counts were then adjusted to reflect pre-COVID conditions based on adjustment factors based on permanent count stations by Mass DOT. If you go to the next slide. We could skip this one. This was for the neighborhood group. Just had this was a supplemental intersection at Wigman to the east. So we can go to the next slide. So this graphic here shows the site is well surrounded by public transportation, which includes bus routes, LRTA Route 17, LRTA Route 19, all within a 10-minute walk, quarter mile, as well as access to the shopping plaza, Middlesex Plaza, down to the east. Existing sidewalk systems along Princeton Street are as well connected by existing systems. The sidewalk immediately adjacent to the site is on the northern side of the facility. So as part of our project, we're proposing a high visibility crosswalk at the driveway to connect that. Go to the next slide. So in terms of the trip generation for the site, we're looking at approximately 100 directional trips. So in the morning, about 100 vehicles exiting the site in the morning, about 36 or so entering the site, single site driveway. We put a distribution based on journey to work, with majority of the trips heading to and from the south on Wood Street, as well as Route 4 heading towards the highway and the Drum Hill Rotary. So we break all these trips up to the different networks. We look at about plus 7 trips to and from the north on Route 4 3A. About 14 trips or so heading to the east on Princeton Boulevard, heading into the town of Lowell. And then the remainder trips, again, heading towards the highway in the morning. These are pretty manageable trips. We'll get into the level of service and operations in a minute. If you just go to the next slide, we'll show the evening equivalent. So in the evening, we're looking at about 165 total trips, with the majority entering, 100 trips entering, and about 65 exiting the site. Again, oriented coming majority back from the highway, Wood Street and Route 4. Approximately 1 trip per minute from those 2 southern locations, and then you got 8 trips to and from the north on Princeton Street, and about 17 again coming from the city of Lowell side. So pretty manageable. We'll get to the level of service on the PM, I believe, if you go to the next slide. Oh, so on this slide side, we don't have the level of service, but the project itself will not have an impact on the area roadways. We did do level of service on them. We're going to remain at level of service D or better at all the study intersections. So pretty minimal impact from this project in terms of that. We are recommending a high visibility rapid flashing beacon crossing at the site driveway to get people across the Princeton Street at the driveway. This would be pedestrian actuated to hit the button, and then it would flash these yellow lights on the rapid flashing beacon to give a higher visibility for that crossing, to get people across the street to the existing sidewalk system. I believe that's all we have for the intro for the traffic.
Any questions on that part? Okay.
Thank you, Dan. I would add that, again, in meeting with the neighbors and abutters, we did hear that traffic was concerned, and that it was something that people were worried about. It does not, based on the study, it does not appear that the traffic creation is terribly meaningful. But that isn't to say that it doesn't concern people. We requested a meeting with the town's Traffic Advisory Committee. We did have that meeting. We went through we went through this report with our study consultant, as well as members of the Traffic Advisory Committee, and talked it through with them, got their feedback. I think I would characterize, based on the letter that is here on the next slide, the town agrees and understands the study and agrees that that is an accurate representation of what the likely traffic impacts will be. That being said, they had asked that if we could help in some fashion to help mitigate some of the traffic impact costs that may occur, and we've agreed to those. The letter references those, and they are also referenced in the development agreement. In some cases, I don't think that specific numbers are hammered out yet, but that's part of the conversation we want to with the intent of being in this community and being a neighbor. This impacts us as well. We want to make sure that we're doing well and making sure that the traffic works for everyone, including our residents. Bob, do you have anything further you'd like to add on the traffic side?
No, I'm just joining now, and I know Dan has been on as well, but I think the project impacts are very manageable, and we have taken the time to consult with the various departments on making sure that we've got all of the relevant information that would lead to design of a proper access for the property, and eventually for commitments to signal timing modifications and adjustments as you described. So I think we're good.
And David, would you like to?
Yes, David Hedison. So for me, when we looked at this project, one of my concerns initially was the impact of traffic, and I knew that was going to be an issue that was going to be raised. One of the benefits as being part of this team is I can look back as someone from this community, well, working in this community, that we had the Glenview. So my concern was having a development of this scale with the Glenview right across the street. The Glenview having over 100 seats or 100 seats at the restaurant, with the traffic reports that were generated, it was like 450 trips per day. So that, coupled with the development at this site, was of concern. When I looked at the net numbers, I felt much better knowing that the Glenview was no longer there. I miss it, but I don't miss the traffic, and I don't miss the fact that there really wasn't a clear entrance or exit with traffic going until 2 o'clock in the morning. So for me, that was a point that I had brought up to the team, but where they were not, they're looking at the site as it is today versus how it was previously. I brought a different perspective that I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Thank you. If we can move to the, any questions, I guess, at this stage on traffic?
Well, just one very small one. I'm looking at the numbers that you talk about coming and going, 100 and some odd in the morning, 100 and some odd in the evening. I look at the number of units here. So there must be assumptions based on the demographics of the inhabitants. And I was wondering if you could lay out those assumptions.
I think Bob can speak to, Bob or Dan can speak to that, yes.
Right, I think we rely on industry standards, standard trip rates for the land use category that's being proposed as the basis for identifying impact, and that impact is defined to be at its highest level during the typical commuter hours of between 7 and 9 in the morning and 4 and 6 p.m. at night. And there are very well-established characteristics for residential communities like this that are based on surveys of similar facilities throughout the country. They're all published and compiled in a document called the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual, ITE Trip Generation. So we really rely on that as the basis for determining how many vehicles would be generated during certain hours of the day, during what we'd call the highest impact periods of the day. And that is directly correlated to the number of units that are being proposed. So those rates are based on a unit basis, right? The rates apply to the number of proposed units to get to those numbers. That basis is very well recognized in the Commonwealth. It's a recognized standard by national sources, and it's a recognized standard by the Mass DOT as well in their review of particular projects like this one. So that's the basis. It's really based on a national survey of similar facilities. And in our own experience in Massachusetts, having worked on literally dozens and dozens of projects just like this, is that when we go back and we look at the actual performance of these types of projects, we actually measure the amount of traffic that they generate. The industry standards, the ITE standards, if anything, tend to overestimate the amount of impact that actually occurs. And there are a number of reasons that might occur that I could elaborate on, but we're very comfortable with what we're documenting in terms of the hourly impact for the project, which, as we've reported in our study, is a modest impact. It's not a very high impact project.
Yeah, well, it does seem modest, but I will say it assumes that only a third of the units actually generate a trip in the morning.
Yeah, so it's important to recognize that this isn't all of the traffic that occurs from these developments. This is on a per hour basis, right? So when you look at that impact number, it's reflecting the highest 1 hour period of either a morning or an evening.
Okay.
Right. So if you look at it over an extended period, 3 or 4 hours, and you have similar levels of activity, you probably get closer, to
1 to 1, yeah.
the so-called unit count. Yeah.
Okay. I'm happy.
Tim Shanahan or Erica, do you have any questions? Or Mike?
I don't have any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
No questions for me either.
Just for the record, Planning Board member Michael Walsh joined the meeting at around 6:50 p.m. Anybody at the table have any questions? Okay.
Thank you. If we can move on to the next slide, I apologize, our civil engineer is en route. He's on a flight. He was not available for this presentation, but I'll be able to talk through some of the issues that he addressed. Broadly speaking, feedback from the abutters was, I'm concerned that, you're building a lot of structure and impervious surfaces, and that somehow that water is going to end up on my property and damage my property. And that's, I think that's a reasonable concern. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts and certainly local building departments require a stormwater protection plan be submitted in all projects. That's an obligation of every project that is built in the Commonwealth, and it is something that we do on every project. And the obligation of that is that basically every drop of water that lands on your site needs to be managed on your site. It cannot be, pushed off onto other sites. And some of the techniques that are used are those on the screen, creating green space islands in the midst of your impervious surfaces is one way. And if you could go to the next slide, please. Bioretention ponds, which we are proposing, which will accept water after it's been treated and then help it percolate back down into the soil, is another way. And then if you could go to the next slide, please. And then underwater stormwater infiltration, or I guess what I call by the brand name Coltech structures. These are structures that are quite predominant. I mean, in probably most projects, most large housing developments or shopping malls in eastern Massachusetts, these structures are underneath the parking. You don't see them because it's not obvious, but they're there. And their job is to accept and manage the water, in some respects to clean it out, and to take out the sediment and particles, and then allow cleaner water to percolate down into the soil. And that is required. That is, like I said, that is a requirement of the Commonwealth in the submittal of a building permit, but it's also the town's requirement to review, and we intend to do that. The topography of the site actually has already lent itself quite well to this dynamic. I don't know if we want to jump all the way back to the front, but the south part of the site, which abuts the Meadowood, some of the Whiteman, and the Windermere communities, already has a significantly higher elevation than those abutting land areas. And it's generally 15 to 20 feet. So water, from the hydraulics that we understand, and actually our wastewater treatment plant person will be available to speak to this, the water tends to percolate down and ultimately northwards towards the Merrimack. And and again, there is a wetland that probably was a beneficiary of some of that water over time in any case. So we're required to act on it. We will act on it. We have an obligation to act on it, and we'll make sure. It really hasn't impacted the neighbors to date, and we will make sure that it doesn't. Any questions on civil engineering? That was kind of the hot point that we wanted to make sure people felt comfortable was being addressed.
Any questions from anyone in the Zoom room?
No, all set. Thank you.
Okay. Any from the table?
The only thing I would ask is a maintenance plan for the retention ponds of some sort in the future, because sometimes they don't get maintained. All right.
And now we have our consultant on-site engineering who will speak to the private wastewater treatment plant. Again, this was an issue of interest and concern with our neighbors. I think the more we were able to explain what was going on, I think we gave them great comfort, but maybe initially it was a little intimidating. Dave Fermato, are you available?
Virtually. Hopefully you guys can all hear me.
Maybe if we could go to the next slide, please.
Could we just have your last name? It's not showing up on the screen.
Sure. Sorry about that. Again, name is David Formato, F-O-R-M-A-T-O. I'm the president of On-Site Engineering, and as Mark had mentioned, we're the consultants for this project related to the private on-site wastewater treatment facility. So as Mark had mentioned, first of all, thank you everyone and members of the board. Thank you for having me. So just kind of high level presentation on this. For those of you that are not familiar with private on-site wastewater treatment systems, it's a pretty robust program that's administered by the Mass Department of Environmental Protection, DEP. These systems are designed, permitted, and operated to provide large-scale wastewater treatment for sites like this where municipal sewer is not available. The state has a requirement that any Title V flow of greater than 10,000 gallons per day requires tertiary level treatment and a groundwater discharge permit. Those permits are designed, are implemented and written such that these systems will remove pollutants from the treated wastewater that either to the level where it either meets or exceeds groundwater quality standards. These types of systems have been in use in Massachusetts since the 1980s. There's almost 1,000 of them currently permitted and in use. And there's a particularly large concentration, along the 495 corridor because of the lack of municipal available sewer in these areas, primarily Westford, some in Chelmsford, Littleton, Acton. So this area, there's a very large concentration of them. We've been involved with several projects, and we know a bunch of projects that have these systems that are in and around. So that part of what we did with the outreach for the abutters was to provide them a little bit of education about what this means, and then also give them some examples and discuss what the logistics are, so they would feel comfortable. Next slide, please. So what we thought we'd do, again, this was also presented to the abutters, we would just provide, some quick examples of these types of facilities. So this particular unit system is, it's in Westford. It's the Princeton Westford site. It was constructed in 2014. As you can see, in the lower right, the treatment facility and building is located essentially on the same level in the same location as the clubhouse and the pool, and adjacent to one of the residential buildings. In addition, the Affluent Disposal, which is after the system performs its treatment, the clean water is discharged subsurfacely into a leaching field, typically built in line with like a stormwater system with Cultec chambers. That system is actually in the grassed area in between 4 apartment buildings. And on the lower left, you can see that's an actual picture of the outside of the treatment facility. It was designed and constructed to blend in with the architecture of the site. So next slide, please. So this is another private treatment facility. This one's in Littleton. It's 144 units. It's the Village Green. It was constructed circa 2015. And again, if you look on the lower right, the treatment facility building is tucked in the corner, right adjacent to one of the large apartment buildings. The effluent disposal system in this case is actually half under the parking, right where that treatment system and building label is, and that's the effluent disposal area. And then again, as you can see, that this facility was also designed to blend in with the site and to match the existing architecture. This also, the developer also decided to incorporate site facility maintenance. So the part of the building that has the pine tree in front of it is the wastewater treatment facility, and the garages are actually like site storage for snow removal equipment and stuff like that. So this location served a dual function. Next slide, please. So in this particular site, this is Graniteville Woods, 164 units of condominiums, detached and some attached townhouses, constructed in 2011. And as you can see, this particular site has the wastewater treatment facility essentially in the backyards of several of the units along Cheyenne Way and across the street from the Indian Ridge Terrace. And one of the effluent disposal fields are kind of interdispersed and commingled around the site. This site used a pressure dose drip dispersal groundwater reuse type of leaching system because of the nature of the soils, as opposed to a concentrated Cultec system, which is more akin to the stormwater. And as you can see, this developer decided to make the building look like a typical New England barn with windows in the cupola. And just a quick note on this: this particular site has active odor control systems, but it's not. I'm sorry, it doesn't have it, and it's not something that was required. Some of these do have active odor control, some don't. This one in particular, it wasn't provided with it, and to our understanding, it's been running great, and there really haven't been any issues. Next slide, please. So just in terms of the impacts to this site. What I think that it's important to understand is that as Mark had mentioned, the original location had over on the lower right, the treatment facility is kind of tucked up against the property line. And then talking with the abutters over by Building 2 here, and talking with the abutters, we were certainly made aware of their concerns relative to sights and noise and that type of stuff. So, that was modified to, if you want to go to the next slide, you can kind of get a sense. So in this particular slide, you can see that the treatment facility was pulled back into the middle of the site, kind of in between the choice facility and Building 2. And that allows for a better buffer between the wastewater treatment facility and the abutters. And then also on this slide on the left side of the plan, underneath Building 1, that's where the effluent disposal is proposed. That area has been preliminary tested, and it was also witness tested this week with Mass DEP. So the soils were confirmed to be suitable, less than 2 minute per inch sands and gravels. This is where the effluent disposal area will be constructed. As Mark had mentioned, groundwater, based upon the topography and the information we have to date, appears to flow from like the Windermere side of the site, actually down towards the river, as opposed to running, again, off towards the Windermere development. So, we anticipate the effluent disposal in this area is actually going to traverse our site, going towards the wetlands and then ultimately towards the Merrimack River. Next slide, please. And that gets us to the next steps, I believe. So, Mark, I guess I'll turn it back over to you, and also available for questions at this time.
Could we just jump back to that prior slide, please? One thing I think it's worthwhile noting, needless to say, we're very comfortable that the system is not going to create odors or sounds that will be unpleasant. You'll note that it's about, I think the dimension is 80 feet from our rental structure. So we've moved them from our neighbors, but we're very comfortable that this won't impinge our ability to operate our residences. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any of them. It's about 70 feet, give or take. So I just wanted to make note of that.
Okay. And this is David. So I always have questions, as well as almost more closely related to the abutters than the developer. And I said, can you please provide us with distances and show us where the buildings are? Because when you're talking about 80 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet, I have no idea what perspective what we're really talking about. And so one of the things that I was really happy about was to see where at Meadowood, when you look at 55, 57, 59, 61, to be able to tell those homeowners, we're looking at, having that structure pretty much where the razor wire was and the basketball courts were when it was a facility for, the kids that were living there. So if you can remember where that was, that is where the facility would be. So it's not going to be, so when we say distance, they can relate it to something that was actually there at the site prior.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Virginia, if I could ask a question.
Sure.
It's Tim Shanahan. I just had how far is it typically? Is there a code how far these plants can be to a residential structure?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tim. So the code, the minimum distance is 50 feet to a residential structure and or 50 feet to a property line. So obviously we're greatly exceeding that in an effort to really be, good neighbors.
Okay, and I apologize if you already answered this, but will this site have an odor control on site?
I did not answer it, and that's a great question. I did want to follow up. So a couple of more specific details related to the facility. All the primary processing of wastewater is going to occur in tanks underground. The building itself is going to house, some equipment, some air delivery equipment, and the odor control system. So this will have active odor control. And what that means is that in the building there will be, essentially an activated carbon system with a fan that pulls the headspace from the tanks outside into the building through that carbon bed to scrub any odors before it gets discharged up through the roof. And within the building itself, any motors or equipment are going to be provided and specified with sound enclosures so that they're essentially, when they're running, you or I could stand next to them and have a conversation and they wouldn't be overbearing. So that, in combination with it being inside a building, is going to attenuate any potential noise concerns. There aren't any lighting concerns other than having lights that are on and off relative to safety, life safety, that type of stuff. This doesn't need to be lit up or anything like that. So that's always a question that comes up as well.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Mike Walsh or Erica, do you have any questions?
Not at this time, thanks.
Me neither. Thank you.
Anyone at the table? Oh, and David, go ahead.
So this is of concern to our group, Choice and SCG, because we will be putting federal funds into the Choice building. We'll be subject to an environmental review where they will be looking at all these standards. So we were like as the facility was moved closer and closer to our building, we were raising questions. What is the minimum? How is it going to be treated? Because at the end of the day, we do not want to jeopardize pulling something closer to us and actually just exclude us from being able to get those funds we need from the federal government. And as is presented, we're comfortable.
Okay, thank you.
Perhaps last thing I'd add, again, this was an item of discussion and interest. Dave Fermato was kind enough to share a list of projects, and I think some of them were noted in the prior slide. And I gave that to some of the neighbors and abutters, and they drove to those sites. And I think they were, I think when you see it in action, you kind of realize that it's a really well-managed system that does not emit odors and does not really emit sound. But it's probably something maybe you have to see to understand. Also worthwhile to kind of make note of. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts requires that approximately 25% escrow be applied and set aside in perpetuity for any immediate repairs to the project. We think this is probably a $3.5 million facility. So there is, $850,000 that will be escrowed. And that isn't money that I touch or control, that's money that the Commonwealth touches, controls. If for some reason I'm crazy enough that I don't want to take care of this facility, which frankly I wouldn't make a lot of sense for me to do after the time we've invested and money we've invested in this project, the Commonwealth has the right and frankly the responsibility to immediately go in and act. So if there's ever a problem with this facility that for some reason we didn't act on, there is a very significant backstop with the Commonwealth to address that issue. And I think that's something that we did share that with the abutters. I think that gives people comfort, knowing that it isn't just our standard, but it's the Commonwealth standard to maintain the operations of this.
And so I have a question. Does the Commonwealth do any monitoring or auditing of the system?
I'll let David speak to that.
Yeah, actually, I was going to jump in, Mark, and piggyback on what you just said, because I think it's important to focus on that part of it as well. The state has a very robust monitoring, oversight, and permitting process. So from an operational perspective, this facility is required to be manned. It's 5 days a week minimum, 2 hours per day, on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, alarm response, including weekends, nights, holidays. So that in the event that there's something happening out there where an alarm would be triggered, the operations staff is called, and they have a preset time, usually within an hour or two, to respond. And there is monthly sampling that's collected and analyzed by independent laboratories that is then sent to the state to review the performance of the facility, whether it's treating everything properly and actually meeting the requirements of the discharge permit. So on a monthly basis, they're getting records of what's occurring. In addition, the operator is required by the permit and also there's an entire set of regulations that governs the operations of these facilities. They're required to do daily process checks when they're there. They have to maintain a logbook on site, fill out all this information. The state is coming out once a year at a minimum to inspect the facility and actually go through that logbook, talk to the operator, talk about what equipment has been maintained, what needs to be worked on, that type of stuff. And on top of that, in the event that the treatment facility, God forbid, is having performance problems or what have you, there is actually a process where the state does step in. They'll issue notices of noncompliance and then consent orders if they feel, as Mark alluded to, that the owners just aren't providing the requisite attention. And those those do have the ability to demand escrow money to be used, penalties, fines, that sort of stuff. So it's a very rigorous process. We don't recommend that anybody get into the private wastewater treatment facility construction and operation area lightly, because it's a commitment. And obviously, Trammell Crow's experience with sites that have these, as well as the type of development work that they do, it's a really an appropriate use of this wastewater disposal venue.
Anything else? I'm not seeing any.
So the next item is sort of landscaping and sort of view buffering. I think that Sean Sanger, principal of Commonwealth, may no longer be available. He said he may have to.
He's not on the.
He isn't? Okay, so.
You got me for a little bit, Mark.
All right,
Oh, I'm
great.
sorry.
Awesome,
I was looking at the names.
Yeah, no, I'm watching another computer, so I apologize. Yeah, we're good. So this is Sean Sanger, as Mark said, with Copley Wolf Design Group, landscape architect, and we've been working with the team, as well as having, I think, a very enjoyable discussion with the neighbors and the abutters, really trying to kind of listen and get a better understanding of concerns and issues for them. So I don't know if we have, the ability, and I apologize on my computer screen that's really small, but I'm going to go from memory on the slides here. So I know the area that we presented to the neighbors and the abutters. What we really enjoyed about this particular slide and aerial was the amount of evergreen. This was kind of shot, fortunately for us, in a little off season, so it was probably either late fall or early spring after the snow had melted. But what we started to see anyway on the graphic here is particularly along the north side of the site, and it starts to wrap around a little bit on the west, the evergreen coverage that we have. So it gives us a really great natural buffer that lives there today, and we want to be able to build upon that. And then certainly with the numerous site visits we've had, we understand that along the kind of entire western edge, as you wrap around the site there, we've got, as Mark said, about a 20-foot grade change, and that is fully vegetated with deciduous trees, and certainly understanding that as we go farther to the east, that coverage and the depth of that deciduous coverage starts to be reduced. So what we've been able to kind of see through site observations, having meetings with the butters, getting an understanding of where that gets a little weak. Yeah, and so within this graphic, it's going kind of big picture, certainly with the wetlands being in the yellow zone that's to the north of the plan. And then within that heavy kind of dashed red line that you see on the plan, it's really kind of highlighting the grade changes in the topography we have, and definitely that topography is working in our favor. It really starts to give really good coverage. It would be a really difficult and expensive area to build upon. So for us, it's a great natural buffer that we do not plan on touching, and keeping that in a good place, and kind of in supplementing that as necessary along the edges. Go to the next slide. So yeah, these are just some images. You guys are all very familiar with the area, but it was good for us just to get a good feel. But the two on the left definitely is the kind of the steeper areas with the really green buffer, and then as you get further to the right, we realize that grade changes from about 20 feet, 15 feet down to more like 5 or 6, and definitely that tree canopy starts to be diminished as you get further to the east on the site, and certainly along the abutters along the direct east side as well. We'll go to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. And then the other thing that we've kind of heard loud and clear, we've talked about fencing. There were concerns certainly about visual separation, but what was also interesting was the ability to kind of prevent, if you will, kind of more of a physical buffer as well between the two projects. The idea of having people physically being able to walk through the woods down into the adjacent neighborhoods was definitely a big concern. So we've talked about adding a fence, which we're showing in a lot of the sections that we've been meeting with on the abutters. And what we heard loud and clear as well is to have that be a green fence in particular. What we really wanted they wanted to see was really not to see the fence, to be honest, and have that just disappear within the forested area of the perimeter kind of buffer areas. And then the other thing just to think about is, obviously in the lower right, evergreens are a perfect evergreen buffer. But there are a lot of plant materials as well. There's a lot of oaks that actually hold their leaves very, very late into the year, sometimes all the way through the winter until the new buds actually push those off. So just thinking really about seasonality, native plant materials, and looking at a variety of ways to really kind of treat this edge, making sure that whatever we introduce from new plant materials, will be fully integrated and blends in with the existing, so that there's really kind of this continuity, if you will, between the new and the existing. So these are some of the sections or some of the images that we talked about being able to develop. We've talked about three-dimensional renderings, we've talked about sections, we've talked about kind of photo-enhanced graphics. Once again, tools that we've used in past projects to be able to kind of communicate, have a good dialogue with neighbors, particularly butters who are really interested in having a one-on-one with us to be able to talk about those plans and kind of the implications, if you will, of the project relative to their properties. And once again, this is really kind of a plan view. Not everybody's really able to read plans, and I totally understand that. So what we do is kind of take a plan graphic for context, and then what you're seeing below that is more of a section that actually illustrates. In this particular case, this was for a bike path project we were doing out in Belmont. But what you can imagine is we were showing the homes, in this particular case, on the left-hand side, then showing the topography changes through section of the kind of the context. And in our case, we were illustrating kind of the heights of the new homes and relative to the existing grade changes in the buffer. We've done probably 5 or 6 of those easily for various abutters around the project.
So if I could just add to that, Sean, thank you. So as I mentioned, as we started our conversation, we started with 3 presentations, fairly broad presentations to 40, 50 people in the room. And from that, we had a lot of questions. A lot of conversations. We then kind of got granular and started meeting with specific homes to talk about their specific concerns and issues. And frankly, one of the big concerns and issues, probably one of the more consistent concerns and issues, is how are you going to make sure I don't really see the buildings? How am I going to not see, cars turning into their garage or to a parking space? How am I going to not see the lighting, the site lighting for parking and whatnot on the site? All very important questions and all very reasonable concerns for anybody living next to the property. As Sean alluded, we've done a series of sections where we've taken photographs of view lines from people's homes, and then we've set elevations for where those structures are, looked at where existing greenery is, where proposed fencing is, proposed greenery is, and then with the appropriate distances, our structures, to look at where those view lines could be. In some cases, we've found what I would characterize as missing teeth. There are pieces of the tree line in which there's just some trees not there. And that's kind of an easy thing to resolve. A combination of evergreen and deciduous plantings will create kind of a 4-season view buffer, as well as using fences, as we showed, and garage locations. We are in the midst of this. We haven't met with everybody yet. We are meeting with people. We have follow-up to do, so I wouldn't ever purport to suggest that we're complete on this. But we're really getting ground level to address the very specific concerns of people. And I think when we've been able to meet with them and kind of convey what our toolkit is of view buffer tools, people understand that and appreciate that. We do have some follow-up. Specific locations of the fencing. We want to use some of the topography as we have it to enhance breaking view lines. And plantings is probably going to be a big part of this. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Sean.
No, I think you're right. And what we've talked about really with the individuals that we have met with is just really an understanding and making sure that the fence is located relative. Some properties have got evergreens that are on technically our property. They feel that and they see that, and they'd like that fencing to be pushed back so that it really disappears behind those evergreens. As you mentioned, some are a little bit lighter, and we're certainly proposing to have some introduced plant material to really kind of supplement that, to give them that screen. And once again, just having a conversation of their preferences and the ability for us to kind of adapt, as long as we're working within kind of the same plant palette and keeping those natives, it's a pretty easy thing to do and have that blend in with the beautiful the tree canopy that's out there right now.
The town of Chelmsford is a dark sky compliant community. It's part of your code. And so the lighting that will be on the site will be hooded and shielded, so it'll be directed to our property and will not, obviously the intent of that is that it does not bleed to the abutters. We will do a photometric study to basically prove that because we know that's something that's very important. I wouldn't want it in my home, so I understand why my neighbors wouldn't want it in theirs. Any questions for Sean on this?
Anyone on the table? Tim or Mike or Erica? I don't see any.
I'm all set, thank you.
I have one question, Virginia. When would you have Mark or Sean a updated landscaping plan particular for this project?
Ask Sean that question, please.
Yeah, no worries. Definitely early on. As I said, we're meeting with a lot of the abutters, those that are particularly interested. So definitely as the final plan, which I think we're getting to a pretty good place with the road alignments, the buildings being settled down, getting those at the right spot, making sure that we understand where those things sit, final low-grade locations, if you will, from finished grading elevation. So once kind of that's all kind of finalized, then we'll be kind of the next step in working with Civil and making sure that what they're doing, both from a grading standpoint, you guys talked about rain gardens and bioswales earlier, making sure that these kind of design elements are all fully integrated into the project, as opposed to it feeling like little individual elements. So we want to make sure this all really is seamless at the end of the day. So we're probably we're a ways out, I'm not going to lie. I mean, we can definitely start to get some really kind of first thoughts on paper for review. But as we start to develop that plant palette and those final locations based on coordinating with Civil, it's going to take us a little bit more time. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Yeah, no, that answers it. I just wanted to, I know on the planning board, especially I don't know if Nancy's there, she's our expert on the board regarding landscaping, and it'd be nice for her to take a look at this.
Yeah, and I'd be happy. I'd love to work with her, Mike, and kind of, make sure we're on the right path there as well.
Thank you.
And I should probably mention two more items. One is when we started looking at the site, we engaged an arborist to assess the health of all the buffered trees. And the reason for that is if I tell people I'm not going to touch those trees, and that's our intention, I also have to put in the caveat that if a tree's dying and it's going to fall, it won't be there. We did do that assessment. That will be conveyed. Actually, we have those trees noted in plan, and we'll share that. There may be some trees that'll have to be removed. We really don't want to. It's one of the, if you've been to the site, it's one of the nicest attributes. The topography and the trees do a lot of the job for us. So that's a nice thing. One other item, and which has come up in conversations, and I'll put out there. Typically, landscaping is done at the end of a project. Right, it's done, everybody's done, that's when you roll the stuff in. I don't think that's appropriate for this project. And so there is a function of seasonality here. You want to be planting in the fall or in the spring. But once our site work is done, we will commit, and we're fine, putting it on paper, to doing the landscape work and the fencing work early on, relatively speaking, early on in the project. So it'll give it time to grow in. It also give us time to see its impact and confirm that it's doing what we want it to do.
Tim, did you have a question?
I do not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Mark, I think just to follow up just really quickly, I don't want to drag this out or belabor it, but I think that's a really good point. I mean, the majority of these edges are pretty far away from the construction, and where they'll be, really getting into a little more work within the soil and the regrading. So the ability to do that early and kind of really help set the tone there I think is really important, and definitely a nice bonus that we have at this particular site.
Any questions from the table? I have a question. The fencing that you've talked about, is that just for the visual appeal, or is there a security aspect to that too, to help prevent people from crossing property lines to the abutting neighborhoods?
I think what we've heard from Meadowwood and Whiteman and Windermere is, to paraphrase Robert Frost, good fences make good neighbors. And so I think there's a feeling that they'd like to have a barrier between the communities.
Okay.
It also is useful as a view buffer, though.
Thank you.
If there's no further questions on landscaping, have Melissa Robbins speak on the development process.
Sure, and I think if you go to the next slide, Virginia, I think that a lot of this is just a rehash, but I think it's important to say because there's been a lot of work done, and I think you can just tell from the presentation that we're giving that's a lot of work done. There's been a lot of work on landscaping, there's been a lot of work on site design, there's been a lot of work on outreach. And this is just the list of meetings that we're highlighting. You're familiar with the first two. We do have an order of resource area delineation. It's attached in your package. We've done a butter outreach. Those are the 3 highlight meetings, but as Mark's pointed out, we've tried to meet with every abutter that's interested and even reached out to the couple that are close to us and said they weren't interested because we'd like to engage with them as well. We received, this says site eligibility letter, and I will talk about that after I get through this list. We've gone through various drafts of the warrant article as to structure, also the development agreement as to structure. I know you have those in your packet. I think they're pretty good as to format, but we have a lot of discussion as to the substance to go through with these 2 boards. I would like to speak briefly about the site eligibility letter, which is really the eligible location determination from DHCD. We received this opinion from DHCD in August. Really what it does is states their opinion that this is highly suitable for a multifamily residential development. What does that mean? I know you probably have read it and you can see it says advisory all over it. So what does that mean? Paul's here to correct me if I'm wrong. I know you have counsel here, but I'll go through it generally, and then if you have questions, I can answer it, or Paul can answer it. But Chapter 348 of the Acts of 2020, which many people call the Economic Development Legislation, or the MBTA Communities Act, it did a couple things. It made some changes to 40A, and it also deemed some communities an MBTA community. Chelmsford is considered an MBTA community. I want to start with the first portion, the changes to 40A. When you are deemed an eligible location, and then you also do multifamily housing in that location, under 40A, in conformance with the acts, it changes the zoning requirements from a supermajority to a simple majority. That's helpful for these boards and also for your town meeting, because if this overlay goes forward, it means that the voting requirement at town meeting will only require a simple majority, which makes it easier for you to get your MBTA overlay through town meeting. The second portion is Chelmsford is an MBTA community. What does that mean? Per the legislation, MBTA communities have to have a overlay or a zoning that allows for 15 units per acre. There are some other requirements underneath that, but that's basically what it says. Communities that fail to do that are going to lose funding under some of the state funds, including Housing Choice, Local Capital Project Fund, and MassWorks. I cite that directly from the legislation. This overlay, as drafted, can satisfy your requirements under the MBTA community, which means you've checked that box and you're not at risk for losing any of that funding. I think that's the biggest high point of this overlay, is that you can actually satisfy that requirement. I would like to talk about the fact that they call it advisory and talk a little bit of the legislation without going into the legislative intent of this, the acts of 358 of 2020. That act is 101 pages long. It puts all the onus on the town of Chelmsford and other MBTA communities to find an eligible site, to put an overlay or zoning in place, to enact it, to send it to the Attorney General, and to get it done. This is a huge duty for our towns. What they did was section 100, I think on page 99, where they were like, well, okay, if a town actually needs some support in making a determination of whether or not they have an eligible community, they can ask us, but it's only advisory. Really, the duty's on the town to make sure that they find an eligible site, that they put the overlay in place, and they get it to the Attorney General. So when you see it says advisory over there, that's actually the language right from the statute, section 100, that says that it has to be advisory from the DHCD. Thank you. So I think that's important to note. I think it satisfies the requirements. I think they were very clear in their position that they think it was highly suitable. I think that if we draft the overlay properly, that we can satisfy this requirement. When we get into the development agreement, or if the board has questions of why we have two, why we have the overlay, and then why we have the development agreement, the overlay has to be by right. That's what the law says. So in order to make sure that all these other conditions can be in place that we've discussed with the abutters, that we've discussed with your traffic advisory board, and any other conditions that this board, the planning board, or the select board may bring up, you do the development agreement first, and then you put the overlay in place to ensure that any of these conditions can be in place under this by right zoning. So you can satisfy the conditions of the town and what the boards may have, but also satisfy the conditions of the MBTA community. I think I said that in much longer format than I wanted to, but I'm happy to answer any questions either of the boards may have. And Paul, if I've misstated anything or said anything wrong, please correct me.
Paul, do you have anything to add?
Good evening. For the record, Paul Haverty, Town Council. I did want to address one question that was asked of me prior to the beginning of the meeting. Select Board Member Wojcik pointed out that there is a provision in the letter that came from DHCD in which they found that this location, in their advisory opinion, is an eligible location. But it goes on to state that their advisory opinion does not establish the threshold of vote required to adopt the zoning proposal. I don't know why they included that language in their letter, other than just out of an excess of caution. But the way I read the statute, General Laws, Chapter 48.5, which was amended as part of this legislation, states that a two-thirds vote is required for a zoning amendment, which is what the previous requirement was. Then it states, except a simple majority is required for an amendment to a zoning ordinance or bylaw to allow, as of right, multifamily housing or mixed-use development in an eligible location. So they're making a determination that this is an eligible location, which automatically then sends this to the simple majority requirement under 48 Section 5. So, other than that, I really don't have anything else to add to the presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
So are you agreeing that it sends it to the simple majority?
The way I read the statute, I do.
Okay.
I don't know why DHCD included the language in their letter that they did, because I think once it's determined it is an eligible location and it is a multifamily proposal that complies with the other requirements of the statute, then it automatically only requires the simple majority.
I got a question for you. So none of the other overlays we've done in the last 10 years apply to any of this? They're trying to force more overlays is what I'm getting out of all this.
So I haven't looked at that. The first thing that you would have to look at is whether they qualify for the eligible location provision of the statute. And we certainly could have some correspondence with the HCD to make a determination if there are any existing locations, but I do know none of those locations allow it as of right. They all require a special permit.
Is there a minimum amount of land to qualify as an MBTA site?
No, I think in the statute, it says that it has to be of reasonable size,
Right.
and it has to be 15 units per acre, so that determination is left to the
But there's
community.
no minimum number of acres?
No.
But obviously, in adopting a zoning bylaw, the town can include a minimum size requirement for a parcel.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Any questions from Tim or Erica or Mike?
I have no
on-
questions, Virginia.
Okay.
No questions.
No questions, thank you.
All right.
More from the Zoom room, from the regular room.
I'll still be here if anything else comes up.
Please, thank you.
I can say, Madam Chair, that this is the second letter that I've dealt with on eligible location. That same exact language was in there. We actually already went to town meeting in Westford on another site that was deemed to be an eligible location. We asked the HCD to take a position on it, and we were told that's town council's job. And town council. So it's up to town council to interpret the law on behalf of the town. DHCD makes an advisory opinion, and then this is the law, and the interpretation of the law is set to the communities and town council. So we struggled with that as well with the last one.
How did that go in Westford?
They didn't approve the overlay. It was something completely different, though, but it was found to be an eligible location. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, if I may, we've been talking about the carrot and the stick. All right, so we know what the stick is now, so what's the carrot?
Well, I think the carrot is the development itself. I mean, we're satisfying, from my own experience in the town of Chelmsford, I know that this site has been eyed for multifamily housing, not only as part of your master plan, it's identified on your housing plan for multifamily development. So I think we're actually satisfying that purpose. I think that the town itself looked at this for multifamily development, and now a developer is actually coming forward with something that can be built out there. And then can also satisfy this MBTA community, but also can build senior housing that can be counted on your town inventory. So I think it satisfies all those requirements. I think that the fact that we've already gone through for a site plan review process, we're already almost there. I mean, we've taken a look at traffic, we've taken a look at landscaping, we've met with all the abutters, we've done sight lines, we've gone through all of the implementation we generally would do in a site plan review process, and we've checked all the boxes. It seems as though, even at first, if your knee-jerk is, oh my God, that's so many units, it's such a high number. When you actually go through the impact that that number has on the community, it really is not that impactful as to traffic, as to the environment, as to visual, as to overall impacts to the community. So I think that that's a carrot in itself. I think that you could do an as-of-right development out there that would be much more intrusive to the neighbors and much more impactful to the community and the environment than what this is today. And I know that David's going to speak a little bit more about the choice development itself, but I also know that there's a huge need in the community for over 62 housing, regardless of the price range. And then this will be 50% or lower AMI, which is huge. I mean, it's hard to build something like that in any community. I think that choice and SCG are a huge benefit to this project overall and will bring something to the table. And I think something else that has been mentioned is that the town is actually going to fulfill their requirements of using all of that payment in lieu of money that they've actually set aside from other developments. That money was always intended to build affordable housing elsewhere. Well, we found it. We found a site. It can be used, it can be built, and it can be built through choice and SCG. So I think overall this project's a net benefit, and I'll let David speak a little bit more to affordable housing if you'd like to.
So, may I, Madam Chairman?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
So I will say, as I said at the Meadowood meeting with the abutters, for me, it's almost an uncomfortable place to be sitting. Because what I've heard tonight is a presentation of a high luxury, quite frankly, a luxury development that's presenting a landscaping plan that I could never present. It's presented a number of amenities that are going to be on the site that I could never provide. In my perfect world, when we looked at this site, when it was going up for auction at UMass, and we had a plan with 3 other developers to come forward with a plan that would provide similar number of units, of which mostly would be affordable. And I would probably be viewed as the skunk at the garden party, presenting, a high number of affordable units of families being built at that site. As the project became more complex with the sewer not being available, that you had to have a wastewater plant, as these things changed, it was going to have to be a high-end developer coming into the site. One of the groups, or one of the people on the list that they had to come talk to was our organization. Because initially, I did not want this project because if it was going to come in as a 40B, I was not supportive of the affordable component that was going to be established because those rental units were not going to be truly affordable to the community. After multiple meetings, we brought forward a proposal to create 54 100% truly affordable units for our seniors in the community. I'm not thrilled to see studios, some of these smaller size units that they're proposing. These are smaller size units of studios, 1 bedrooms, some 2 bedrooms, almost no 3 bedrooms. It doesn't really address all the families that need affordable housing in this community. If I proposed the number of 3 bedrooms that we really need in this town, we would not see a beautiful green 6-foot, 8-foot fence. They'd probably want to see razor wire. I'm sorry. So while this project as a whole, it doesn't really address the needs of families in this community, it shows to me an opportunity to create 54 truly affordable units, and we do really turn away a number of seniors that want a senior development or a high-end development where they can live. They presented to me a project that has a Scrabble room, Scrabble board the size of a wall, where people can drink their port or their sherry. They won't be people that would be living in my housing, but there'll be people that currently live in Chelmsford that want a high-end product. Great. So I find myself in an odd position where we support this project primarily because we can use the funds that have been set aside for affordable housing development and not just create something that has an affordable name, but it is truly affordable to the seniors that need it in town. You know, if this doesn't go forward, I said it to Meadowood, I'll say it to the community. If this project does not go forward, the site is not going away. Trammell Crow does not own the site, another developer does. And I am bent on seeing this site not used for 22 homes, but it's a perfect site to do higher density housing. And in my perfect world, if this fails, I want to come back to you with the project that has probably similar number of units, but a lot more affordable to it, which would be a lot less popular. But that's my position. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks for the honesty.
Where are we going next, Mark?
If there's not any further questions on this part of the presentation on the zoning, I'd just like to jump for a moment to the abutter engagement. And again, as I kind of presented, we started with 3 meetings with lots of people, and really it became lots of meetings with only a couple people. And, you know, I probably should have sat down and totted it out, but, you know, we're talking 50 to 100 meetings with various abutters. That's how this process works best, if we're hearing what people are concerned about, and we're trying to address and resolve those concerns. So, as you've seen in the iterations of the site plans, but is a little bit summarized in this slide, I believe in front of you, yeah. The things that people have told us they're concerned about that we're trying to address, there is an area on the site that is of a different elevation topographically and abuts the Meadowood community. And I believe it's been used historically by the Meadowood community since I don't even know how long back. They asked that we would ease them to use that land so they could know that they could continue to use it. I think they use it to store some of their landscape equipment. I think people walk on it, you know, walk their dogs and whatnot on it. And we said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's something you've used for quite some time. As I mentioned before, we're committing to maintaining the existing tree buffer. We don't want to touch it. It's our best friend. We will do additional plantings, and again, we'll need to iterate that and kind of get more granular, but we'll get there. The fencing was a priority, and we're going to do that. There is a manhole that has had some overflows. I'm kind of mystified why it's there, and it's kind of on the Windermere Meadowood sort of line that has created some water issues, and it will be decommissioned, and that problem will go away. And I think that's important to some of the people that live right there. There is a conversation about emergency vehicle access. We are amenable to interest by the Meadowood community, if they maintain that interest, in maintaining an emergency egress for their community onto our property. If they don't feel that's as necessary, that's kind of fine with us as well. In our meeting with the department heads, the fire chief had no concerns with the ingress egress off of Princeton to support our community. So that emergency access is not something that is needed by code or by desire for our development. In speaking with members of the Windermere community, I think they have some of the similar concerns in terms of view lines. Definitely traffic is something that concerns some of those community members. That's why we went straight to the Traffic Advisory Committee. You know, I mean, as Dan and Bob Michaud mentioned, you know, the information that we're not cherry picking the data that is being placed in the study. It's based on information that's overseen by MDOT and by, frankly, national standards, it doesn't indicate that there will be a lot of traffic impact. It's going to be our neighborhood too, though. We want to make sure that it's not going to be a problem. So we are interested in traffic calming measures. The rectangular flashing beacon at effectively Bruyette and Princeton is a traffic calming measure. We have proposed in that traffic advisory letter, and it's reflected, I believe, in the development agreement, that we would contribute traffic calming devices, the solar controlled flashers with the speeds. That has to be coordinated with the state because Princeton's a state road. That's something we're amenable to. Further, it is our understanding that the town recently was accepted for a traffic improvement program study for the intersection of North and Princeton, and it was suggested that as potential neighbors, could we contribute to those, the next stage of planning, which requires, I think, 25% design plans, and we've said, yes, we'd like to do that. So we want to help as much as we can in eliminating any traffic impact, whether it is negligible as identified by the study, or whether it's more meaningful as some of our neighbors feel it is. We want to be part of the solution on that. And lastly, on Whiteman Street and Princeton Street, I think they have similar concerns and issues. They want to know about fencing, they want to know about landscaping, they want to know about traffic controls, and those are all things that, we think we're checking those boxes. I wouldn't tell you right now that we have 100% resolved every question that everyone's asked, but I'm available to anybody who wants to sit down and talk about it, and we've certainly gone to great lengths to do so. The meetings that we held, mailings went out to the certified abutters list that was delivered to us from the town. We've done as much outreach, well, not as much, we'll continue to do the outreach as required, but we've done an extraordinary level of outreach to interact with our neighbors and abutters. If you go to the next slide, I've kind of touched on this already, but again, meeting with the abutters and understanding the concern about the sewage treatment plant location, we moved it. It was something we could do. The topography allowed us to do it. I'll be honest, if the topography didn't allow us to do it, I would have gone back and said, I'm sorry, we can't do that. But we could do it, and that's the good news. We can resolve that issue. If you look at the next slide, this is a section that Sean referred to. This is, I think it's 18 St. Andrew's Way. I think we lopped off the number. But this, again, is an example of what we've done, where we've looked at the elevation of the structure, and this is on the north side of St. Andrew's Way in the Meadowwood community, and we've looked at the elevations of our structures. We've looked at the existing foliage. We've looked at proposed foliage. And what we've done is we've said, and then we've looked at likely sight lines. And we're using these as tools to solve problems. And this tool is the one that indicated that there's a couple of missing teeth in the tree line. So that's where we would do supplemental plantings. Ultimately, all those plantings have to get captured on a piece of paper along with fencing, and it has to be memorialized to protect the interests of the town and the abutters and make sure we do what we said we're going to do. But we're fine with that. That's, we have no problem with the transparency of those agreements. And we'll continue to do things like this section, to identify additional landscaping and other view buffers as they're needed. Any questions on that item?
I'm not seeing any. Hang on.
Virginia?
We got a question. Go ahead, Tim.
If I could say, I've received a ton of emails from the public, in favor of the project. I think you were on the emails as well, Virginia. And also, we received a lot that, weren't in favor, but had then changed their mind after meetings. So I can tell you that the meetings have definitely been helping, because as I said, we've received a lot of emails from the public now in favor that weren't before. So I definitely think that's been a great help with the community. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Tim.
If we could jump to probably the next slide, zoning procedure, and I guess I'd call it next steps. Melissa?
Yeah, and I don't know, Madam Chair, if you want to table the next steps until we get through. I know on your actual written agenda for this evening, there were a couple other items before moving forward. One with the next after our overview was town updates on SHI from Paul and Evan, and then to talk about the draft zoning and the development agreement. So if you want to follow that procedure, I think next steps probably should be the last talking point.
Okay. Paul and Evan?
Good evening, Evan Belansky, Community Development. Before I forget, I just wanted to follow up on the fire access road. So Fire Chief Ryan did come by the office this week within the last couple of days, asked to pull the Meadowwood zoning file. His recollection was that that special permit did require the fire access between the UMass West property and Meadowwood. He was in fact correct. He has forwarded I believe it was an internal memo at this point, to myself and to the town manager. He has not indicated, at least to me, as to whether he has a strong preference one way or the other. But he is making it clear that it is a requirement per a zoning permit. And there's likely a zoning process via modification that may be required if parties agree to eliminate that. So on to the subsidized housing inventory. I'll be brief. I think both boards have received an email update based upon a projection that was presented to the select board at a public meeting. Those projections date back almost a year to date, and those projections are fairly spot on. The 2020 census has not officially been released. I think it's within the next week or so where the housing unit counts will be released, but preliminary best available data has Chelmsford at a total year-round housing units of 14,769, with 1,433 being deed restricted affordable. That is a 9.7%. And as you know, in order to comply with 10%, with 40B, you need to have 10%. So that is a deficit of 44 units. And since council's here, you can speak to more detail as to how all these numbers work. But simply stated, when the 2020 census is officially released by DHCD and they update the state subsidized housing inventory for the town of Chelmsford, once the town approves 44 or more units, the date of that approval, in this case, for this example, would be a zoning permit. The town, similar to 104 Turnpike, would submit a local action permit via a zoning permit being approved. And if my information is correct, the date that that zoning permit is issued would be the date that the new deed restricted units would be counted towards the SHI. And essentially what that would mean is for the next decade, from 2020 to 2030, for purposes of 40B, we would be compliant, or in other words, we'd have a safe harbor. I'll try to answer any questions. Like I said, Paul Haverty is here as well.
Go ahead, Nan.
Thank you.
Well, Nan, before you, Paul, did you want to add anything to what Evan said? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Evan, it's my understanding that units can at some point fall off of that list.
That's correct.
And that maintaining our 10% is required throughout the 10-year period, even once those units fall off, such that units could fall off and we would be then under our 10% again. Can you talk about the rate of fall off that's projected over the next 10 years, and therefore what our exposure is?
Yeah, I know David's speaking up over my shoulder. Meadow Woods at Brick Hill, 82 Brick Hill Road. It's a rental project.
Could David answer this better?
I have the information right
Okay.
here. It's 188 rental units, so all 180 count. Affordability expires in 2029. I believe through David's efforts, that 2029 date is a new date.
Can I stay here?
Sure.
Okay. David Hedison. So we were party to that development, and we are, the only restriction is through our office now at this point, and we continue, every time they want to refinance the property, we have successfully required them to push out that date. So it already should have fallen off, and we're actively always watching that and pushing it out actively. And I will say I'm not concerned with the 2029 date. And I do believe it's actually beyond the 2029 date at this point.
So just to clarify, and I have not looked at the permit that was issued for that project, but there's case law that states that the expiration of an affordability requirement that is included in a regulatory agreement doesn't necessarily mean that the units will come off of the town's subsidized housing inventory. In fact, if the permit that was issued by the Board of Appeals, I'm presuming this was a 40B development, right? So if the permit that was issued by the Board of Appeals back when this was originally approved either stated that the affordability shall be in perpetuity, or even if it was simply silent in terms of the term of the affordability, then it remains affordable so long as that building does not comply with the underlying zoning requirements. So the only way that it could actually come off of the subsidized housing inventory is if there was a provision in the decision that limited the length of the affordability requirement, which did occur back, in the 1970s, early 80s. Some of these decisions by boards did ill-advisedly include limitations on the length of so I would have to look at the actual decision to see what it states, but it's not an automatic that these units will come off just because the term in the regulatory agreement has expired.
Thank you.
Are there other properties at risk in the next 10 years of coming off?
Can I answer that?
None that are on the list.
I would say none that's on the list, so I'm not, so looking at that, I concur with Mr. Belansky. So one thing that, I've been around for 30 years or so, and the one thing I've been so hot to trot on is the one development that we do risk losing units. If we do lose units at one of the homeownership developments, they actually do not come off our SHI. So, and we've taken steps to make sure that they remain in the program as much as possible.
Any other questions? Tim, Mike, or Erica, you good?
I'm all set, thank you.
Okay.
I'm good, thank you.
All good, thanks.
I would
Okay,
like to add 300 more.
Just back to your presentation, Melissa.
So I think, Madam Chair, the next thing on the town's agenda is new information, which is the draft zoning and the draft development agreement. And I know that I spoke about it quickly, and I know that you have it in your packets to review. I know that town council has reviewed these initial drafts. Just what I want to make sure I state to both boards is that these are drafts, especially the development agreement. You may see that there's already mitigation factors in there that have been set. There's numbers in there that have been set just in this draft. But those are ones that we've already agreed to or we've talked to Traffic Advisory Board about. These are obviously still things that we can negotiate with either the Board of Selectmen or the Planning Board. This is meant to be a format that the board can use, and then we can negotiate through the development agreement going towards town meeting. So I just want to make sure that's very clear. So even though you see red lines and changes, this isn't a final form. And they're going to work as a two-step process. We're going to have this development agreement done. The Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board will have to agree to its terms, and then the overlay will go to town meeting to get approved. And again, that's to satisfy the requirements of the MBTA community that these things have to be as of right. And the development agreement will protect all the interests in the towns and the conditions that they want and the agreements we have for landscaping, lighting, the neighbors, and other issues that may not be covered in a by right plan. I won't run through these documents. I think that and the boards may have specific questions for us or for Paul, and we're happy to answer any of those. I will be asking for more planning board meetings very soon where we will get into more specifics of these and certainly more feedback from the Board of Selectmen, but I'm excited to hear if you have any comments about either of these documents, either the development agreement or the overlay, or if you have questions for me or town council.
I guess I have a question on process to get from here to there.
Sure.
The zoning part of it is something you're going to go work with the planning board.
Right.
The development agreement, I see the signatures that are on the draft are all the select board.
Correct.
And, you know, I personally think that at least the select board needs some time to work with town council and understand the parameters of the development agreement and what else we might want to consider. I mean, there's things in here like the applicant will not disturb the existing wetlands. Well, I mean, that's the law. That's not something that we're negotiating.
Right.
So, how do you envision, and I don't know that I can't speak for my board members, but I don't want to go forward with a development agreement without having the planning board aligned around it because it's all interrelated.
Yes.
So how do we envision, are we talking more joint meetings also to get from here to there? Does the planning board want the select board to go work on the development agreement while you work on the zoning and we see how that pans out? It's just not clear to me how this all
I can
comes
speak to
together.
that generally, and then Paul can also step in. But generally what happens with the development agreement for site plan design is the planning board sets the parameters generally for what the site plan attributes are going to be. You know, for example, I know that there's a section in there that says $8,000 will be set aside for traffic mitigation. The planning board may think there needs to be more or less, or that there needs to be other conditions in there to satisfy some traffic mitigation. They would set forth, we would continue to have discussions with the planning board, they would set forth all of the design requirements that they generally go through in a site plan process. Then this document would come to the Board of Selectmen, and you'd oversee it with the planning board's input, and the planning board would bring it forward and say, this is what we think is reasonable, and the Board of Selectmen can have some input in it at that point as well, if you think that there needs to be additional mitigation, or if you disagree with the planning board.
If you're talking about content that's related to site planning, I don't understand why that wouldn't go through the permitting process versus a development agreement. The development agreement is something that benefits the community, right?
Yes,
So, but it's not, so what you're saying sounds like standard planning board protocol.
Some of it yes, and some of it no, because remember, the overlay is going to satisfy all of the general site plan standards and will state that there's a requirement for 15 units per acre. The development agreement will say what the actual unit numbers will be, what I think we have in there that what the set aside would be for the affordable section, and that Trammell Co. will be responsible for setting the utilities and giving the affordable units wastewater. These are things that are not generally in an overlay. And I'll just tell you briefly why the Board of Selectmen are the signatory and not the planning board, is these documents have to be signed by the chief elected official of the community, and that would be the Board of Selectmen. So that's why the Board of Selectmen signs off on it with the planning board's input and not the Board of Selectmen. So some of these will have to be through a development agreement. This is to protect the conditions that are over and above what are required in the overlay.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I ask for just a lifeline confirmation from?
I agree with Attorney Robbins. I would say, my first impression on reading the development agreement was there was a lot of stuff in there that was probably superfluous and not necessary. After speaking with Melissa, I can see some of the reasoning that they wanted to include it. I'm not sure it all needs to be there. I think whatever the board at the end of the day decides to do, they need to make sure they're not limiting the ability of the planning board to review this project and impose additional conditions. So any.
So are we, are we better off letting the planning board go work this process and keep us informed versus?
Again, I think we can craft this language to make sure that we are not limiting the planning board's right to include additional conditions or require additional review. So I'm not really too concerned about that. I do agree that there are certain aspects of what's being proposed that are more appropriately in a development agreement than in the zoning bylaw, because it would leave us, if they were coming up short of the minimum requirements of the housing choice legislation, then we would not get the benefits of passing this if it's in the bylaw. However, if the developer is voluntarily agreeing to it outside the terms of the bylaw, then we would still be able to benefit from those.
So is the point organization for negotiation of the baseline development agreement, the planning board, the select board, or this joint
It
board?
can
Like
be,
what-
it can be joint, but ultimately it does have to be executed by the select board, because this is a contract.
I understand that
that's gonna
we
be binding the
we
town.
sign it off, but you're sounding like the heavy lifting is planning board. So I'm just trying to understand, even in terms of next steps, where we go from here.
Right. I think it would be
How we
helpful
do it.
to get input from the planning board regarding what has already been put into the development agreement and see if they have any concerns with that. But at the end of the day, what you want to make sure is absolutely included is language in the development agreement that is very, very clear that this is not in any way intended to limit the ability of the planning board to impose conditions or conduct review that is above and beyond what is stated in the development agreement.
Right.
I have a-
Let's
I
keep
have a
going with
question.
questions. Go ahead, Deirdre.
In the past several trips to town meeting, the various zoning articles and things that have been brought by the planning board pertaining to zoning have not gone through. And I think it's important, with town meeting kind of right around the corner, that we have general community buy-in. I appreciate that you've met with the abutters and are working to fulfill their requests. But I'm wondering if we should have a more public input session. You know, we normally do that as part of the planning board site plan review. Or
Before we bring anything to town meeting, we have public input.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, it's-
No, but
Public
I don't want, I
bylaws.
think it should
I-
happen before that, because I think if it happens at town meeting and it's not already
No,
clear.
In order to pass a zoning amendment, there has to be duly noticed public hearings by the planning board in which the opportunity to discuss that particular zoning change is presented.
Yeah, and I would think
It's
in
required.
this case, we could make that a fairly extensive event. I think it would have to be.
Or like a listening session, where people come and bring their
Say
thoughts
early
and
on.
we listen.
Yes.
Like, that's not necessarily what we always do. I'm talking specifically about this overlay, specifically about this plan, that, you know, the representatives from the neighboring communities could step forth and say, I didn't like it, now I do. I still don't because of this. And we could hear it, and the public could hear it, and it would, I think, increase the transparency and give the project a better chance of success, if that's what we're striving to achieve.
Madam Chair, I did have, when we get through to the procedure, I did have a suggestion on an additional public forum in addition to the public hearing process.
Do you want to address that now? or
Sure,
just-
so just as to timeline, what I was envisioning was that there would be work with the planning board, yes. And I think that we will not make the October town meeting, obviously, but we are hoping to have a special town meeting prior to the holidays. And that's, you know, gives us a couple months now to do some work to get this ready for a special town meeting. How would that play out? I would imagine that what we're going to do is have a public forum, perhaps the week of October 11th. What do I mean by a public forum? Just exactly what you stated. It would be something the Trammell Co. would put on. We'd invite the boards if they wanted to notice it to come, but really it would be general public could come. We could give them this presentation. We could answer questions and comments. This would be over and above what would generally required by zoning. I think also during that October 11th week, that will be our first discussion during the public hearing with the planning board, that we actually could have a discussion about the development agreement and the overlay and the terms, and perhaps during that October 13th meeting, we set aside some work sessions or some additional meetings so we can actually get to the meat of the agreement, which is what Madam Chair has been talking about, so that we can get some progress there. Then the week of the October 25th is actually another regularly scheduled planning board meeting. And at first, I was thinking that would be ideal to hold the first public hearing on the zoning. But the more I think about it and the more public input there would be, perhaps during that week, we would have another special meeting, notice a special meeting, obviously, for the actual overlay article, to have a discussion on the overlay. And of course, that would be per the availability of the planning board during that last week of October to have an additional meeting. That would actually set the table and give us an additional month if we were going to try to have a special town meeting towards the end of November, like November 22nd. That's an additional month from that first public hearing. It still gives us plenty of time to schedule additional meetings with the planning board, additional meetings with the Board of Selectmen, and revise these documents. As you know, and I have counsel standing here next to me, the warrant article only has to be set 14 days before a special town meeting. So we're 2 months out right now, and we still have plenty of time as long as we put our plan into action now.
Paul Cohen, can you come forward for a minute? You can stay there, Paul. It's all right. So with respect to the requirement to sign the warrant 2 weeks ahead of time, I know I think you had some concerns about giving people more notice than that.
Yeah, the warrant for a special town meeting has to be signed 14 days prior to the town meeting occurring. But in reality, you really need about 30 days because, as the board knows, and I think everybody in the room knows, you not only have to have the warrant signed and posted, but you have to engage the finance committee, who has to hold a hearing, on the warrant articles. The select board would meet to hold a hearing on the warrant articles. And I also think you got to give notice to the residents of the community that a town meeting's coming. And I think, as the concern was expressed earlier, you really 14 days is technically a requirement, but you really need a month. So I think what Melissa's Attorney Robbins is describing is about a month lead time. And in fact, I would suggest that as soon as the language for the zoning article is finalized, that the warrant be executed so that we have as much advance notice as possible. Because, while that process is going, you have advertising requirements for the zoning hearing, as was noted earlier. And I just think the more lead time we provide people, also we've got to reserve the room for town meeting. We've got to, it's all the logistics of putting together a town meeting together, that the more time we have available, the better off that we'll be.
So, 30 days prior, if you're talking before the holidays, then you're saying sign the warrant on October 20, when we meet on October 25th.
Yeah.
And the concern I have is, in Springtown meeting, we got into this mode where we were signing off the warrant before the zoning articles were done. And frankly, it got really messy. And we spent a lot of time chasing things because we weren't ready by the time we signed the warrant. So I'm just trying to figure out, how do we get ready if we think we need to sign a warrant 30 days ahead, or is there another way to notify the finance committee still has to review.
You can notify people to save the date, but
right.
But as you said, they want to see the text of the warrant article. Again, we have a draft. We have a draft warrant article, and council's reviewed it. I think I think the concern has always been, and Evan and others can speak to it, particularly who lived in the room, is traditionally what's happened at town meeting is, despite the planning board's hearings on the articles, advertised hearings on the articles, you don't have strong attendance. And what ends up happening is people go into town meeting, then they pay attention, and then that's when all the amendments get made on the floor. I don't know how to avoid that problem, because that's just a human nature. It's it's no different than when I hold pre-town meetings and I get 25% of the reps, and then 100% of the reps show up at the meeting, and then you've got questions that could have been better understood in advance, and that's just
Melissa, our finance committee typically issues their recommendations in a formal book 2 weeks before town meeting.
Right.
So that's why they would need it before the 2 weeks.
I still think we're 2 months out now. We already have a draft overlay and a draft development agreement that town council has reviewed and we can work through. I don't think, and if need be, we can always change courses on dates, but I think at this point we need to set a date and try to reach it, and not just try to reach it and not set a date. Because the expectation is it would never happen then.
Just to clarify, the zoning public hearing.
Yep.
If I was told today that the planning board wanted to schedule that zoning public hearing, it's 3 to 4 weeks out, just based upon the Chelmsford Independent, has to be noticed twice. So you're talking mid to late October at the earliest for when that zoning hearing could open. That still fits in with the schedule we're talking about. Between now and then, work session with the planning board, finalize it prior to a public hearing opening in late October. It's a quick turnaround. The other piece I just wanted to, emphasize is that while town meeting is voting on the overlay language, as I've mentioned previously, this is, because a development agreement is in place, it is really a project-based rezoning. So the community's, and particularly town meeting's focus should be on that development agreement and the details that it references. The site plan is going to be referenced. So people will know exactly what kind of project is being voted on. Normally, as part of town meeting, it's a general zoning bylaw with a lot of what-if scenarios and what-if questions. I think what we're hearing is the presentations are very site-specific and project-specific. Then you layer on that development agreement. You're adding predictability at town meeting. So people should understand that they're voting on a particular project with particular locations of buildings, particular types of buildings, the housing, the bedroom count, the number of units. So while the overlay is fairly general in nature, and even though that's what town meeting is legally voting on, because we'll have this development agreement that town meeting isn't voting on but should be presented, I think that it will provide a lot of predictability where otherwise a typical zoning bylaw doesn't have.
My understanding is also at special town meeting, there'll be the community preservation
Yes, funding.
funding component, which would authorize a certain amount of money for the development of the affordable senior housing.
But also just sort of follow up the process is, we're talking a lot about town meeting, but that's not the end of the permitting process. Let me explain what happens is, if as suggested, it goes to town meeting the end of November, okay? Once a town meeting, let's say a town meeting acts on it favorably, that zoning bylaw then has to be submitted by the town clerk to the Attorney General's office. We're seeing the Attorney General take 90 days, which is their statutory limit, to turn a bylaw approval around for town meeting action. So realistically, if it's submitted at the end of November, let's say town meeting acts at the end of November favorably, the town clerk submits it by beginning of December, the town wouldn't receive approval from the Attorney General till the beginning of March. And then what happens after the bylaw becomes effective in March, they then would have to submit to the planning board under the new zoning bylaw, which probably means you're not opening a hearing on this till April or May timeframe, with probably the then seated planning board at that time. So, and then we know how these hearings take. You're probably not talking to site, if this were to go through the hearings and then the appeal period and everything, you're probably not talking having a final approval till probably next summer. And I just want people to get, because I know this idea that, this is going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen tomorrow because it really is a lengthy process. I want people to understand, the steps of where you're getting to. So you're probably talking a project that's probably going to be acted upon by the planning board if town meeting acts favorably next spring, and probably final permit approval next summer, and then that's probably when you would see some activity, 9 or so months from now. So just wanted to lay out perspective.
Why don't we go? Deirdre, do you have any other questions or comments? Nan?
I think my only comment is a caution in terms of putting the effort into getting the overlay right for the town.
Can you get to a mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I think my concern is that we put the effort into editing and detailing the overlay bylaw verbiage such that it is right for the town. As we've seen in the past, a developer's plan is not necessarily the last plan that comes forward. And as good as this plan looks, whatever we do with that bylaw is going to be the final word on what can be built there. You know, we saw it downtown with a really, really gorgeous plan that came in, got approved, and then they came back with a reduced plan, shall we say, that was substantially different, that failed to address historic qualities of the town and such. So I don't want to see that happen here. I mean, I just want to make sure that whatever we do with this, we get construction that is appropriate for the town, and that we do that through the bylaw overlay.
Madam Chair, I can just speak to that quickly, just as to the development agreement. The development agreement will move forward. So if you're worried about Trammell going away or Trammell not upholding their end of the bargain, even after the overlay's in place, the development agreement still lives on. And even if Trammell Co. were to walk away, that development would go to the successors or assigns to that property. So you not only have the overlay, you also have that development agreement.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah, just
Get
an
to a
addition-
microphone, Mike.
Yeah. An additional comment on that is, I think there's a very careful dance that has to be done here. The overlay and the development agreement have to match, and the determination of what things go in the development agreement and what things go in the overlay has to be carefully adjusted so that there is room to make necessary changes if they have to be made, but that there isn't so much latitude that you wind up with a project that looks different.
Right.
And I think we're going to see Paul at a few meetings, the planning board, as we do that, because it's going to be very tricky work.
Okay. Paul McDougall, do you have any comments? Henry?
No, I think I'm fine.
Erica?
No comments, thank you.
Mike Walsh?
No, I'm all set, thank you.
Tim Shanahan?
I got nothing more at this time.
Okay. Pat?
Just one question, I guess, about the timing. Can we go to town meeting before the development agreement is completed or not?
Theoretically, you could go to town meeting before a development agreement is completed, but that would really eliminate the ability to do a development agreement.
Okay, that's a good
Because
answer.
once the zoning is passed, where is the incentive for the developer to enter into a contract limiting what they can do?
Okay.
So realistically, the development agreement has to come before the zoning change happens.
George, do you have any questions? Mark? Ken?
Just my only comment is, I guess, to the planning board, you know, where you issue your caution about how to proceed. We as the Board of Selectmen, I don't want to speak for everybody, but for me personally, will need a lot of help and guidance from the planning board.
Yeah.
You know, as we go through it.
I
And so
recognize that.
the more communication I think that we get between the two boards,
Yeah.
better this will go and present at the town meeting, and so we just need to keep those lines of communication open.
I guess that comes back to me. I am still not clear on the development agreement and whether the nucleus of activity for that starts with the planning board or the select board, or whether we need to put more joint meetings on the calendar.
I think that more joint meetings would be a good idea. I think that that's
Not
going
that
to
I know
help.
where they're going to fit, but
I think it's going to help avoid the situations that Mike was just suggesting, you know, could occur with regards to conflict between the zoning bylaw and the development agreement. So understood that finding time to hold those meetings may be difficult, and perhaps if not joint meetings, then at least, you know, formal communication from the planning board to the select board, sort of outlining
you
their
on
concerns.
put the planning board on the select board's regular agenda, because yeah. we're meeting this Monday. I mean, we could put a segment on there where at least the select board members could ask some more questions regarding the development agreement if you guys want to do that, and that might help inform the planning board process. And then our next meeting after that is October 25th. So I think it's really important that somehow we're
I mean, I
we're
think the more
understanding where
communication,
you're
the better.
progressing. What?
The more communication, the better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we could, let's recognize that the process is going to be iterative, and it's going to have to be iterative.
Yeah.
Which means a larger number of smaller meetings is probably a more effective approach than one or two grand ones where we try to solve world hunger in 2 hours.
I agree. Madam Chair, I do agree, though. I mean, I think that if this was on the Board of Selectmen agenda for next week for further discussion, and then also on the Planning Board agenda for the 13th for continued discussion, and then maybe some work sessions, and then back to the Board of Selectmen agenda for the 25th, that would keep it rolling on the development agreement side, even as the overlay is moving forward. And I would ask the Planning Board to perhaps pick a date or put it on their regularly scheduled meeting or direct Evan to do so for the end of October, because without that action, we're not moving forward.
In other words, you mean do the, get it noticed?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that we might want to do that.
Let me, okay, so one thing at a time.
Yes.
Is everybody, at least for the select board, are you okay with putting it on just so we can take some time with the development agreement between now and Monday and just have the opportunity to ask town council any questions or anything that we might have? And the planning board has no objection to us doing that, and you would kind of do likewise, and then we come together?
If we're gonna move that quickly, I think we need to.
Okay. Paul, I saw you shaking your head. Are you having trouble with something there?
Evan and I were just there. I mean, I think the concern, and you're almost going that way, is you got to start from the end and work backwards.
Right.
Because if you look at it, you've got town meeting, that if you take the date of November 22nd, which is the Monday before Thanksgiving, that's 7 weeks from Monday.
I know.
Okay. And then if you then move back, which we talked about, and it's not, this is to speak factual, if you move back to the October date of the 25th of signing a warrant, that's 3 weeks from Monday. And then you said advertising the hearing is, which is where you're going is, so basically what's going to happen is, what's going to happen between Monday the 4th and Monday the 25th over those 3 weeks, that the select board's going to have that warrant ready to be signed, and then you're going to have this advertised. It means you're going to have to meet, and as you noted, you're going to have to meet repeatedly. And I think Virginia noted earlier, you've got a busy schedule in October, including fall annual town meeting, traffic listening sessions, and so forth. So I'm just saying is, you've got to be committed basically to weekly meetings.
And I think there was a thought process that if some of this work was, that I had heard from you, Melissa, that if some of this work was done in October, that kind of gives us November to tie a bow around it and get ready for town meeting. And it really doesn't, because I think what I'm hearing is we really have to have the bow tied by October 25th if you want to have a November 22nd town meeting.
Right, 4 weeks later. Yeah, I think that's fair.
So now the question is it feasible to get everything tied up and pretty by October 25th? And if it's not, then
I think it's attainable, but I just think you've got to leave here tonight with that schedule, but these are the meetings we're going to have, these are the dates, because I agree, if November 22nd is the date, which, then you need to sign that warrant on the 25th of October, which means you've got to be scheduling meetings over the next 3 weeks so that you can sign it. Again, I believe that council and Evan and Melissa and other parties can get the language for the warrant article. I'm not troubled by the warrant article.
Well, we had another situation that came up where we have to schedule another unique meeting, extra meeting, and we found 2 eligible dates in October.
Right.
Period. So that's kind of why I'm raising this, is you can say we're going to have a lot of meetings and everybody's going to get together, but you've got 13 volunteers who have full-time day jobs and are already overscheduled with all of the town meetings we have to support right now and all the extra meetings that are already happening beyond this. So I'm just trying to be realistic, and I agree with Paul. If that's the date, then we have to set the dates before we walk out of here.
Right.
Virginia, can I ask you a question? This is
Sure,
Walsh.
Mike.
Why does this have to all be done by the end of the year?
Yeah, that's my question.
Why can't the special town meeting go into January or February and do it right? Why do we have to rush it?
We don't.
Did I miss that? Is there a
but I-
date that I missed?
No, but to Mike's point, I don't think it's a rush. I mean, we're gonna have to get it done.
Well,
And living
I
in-
was just working off of your proposal
Right.
to do it on November 22nd.
Right, and I'll tell you, Madam Chair, the reason I picked that date was just try to do it before the holidays, because if we do it at the next week, we run into Thanksgiving and then Hanukkah and then to Christmas, so I was trying to do it before the holiday period when it becomes even more difficult to schedule these in-between meetings. So I know that some of the board members think it's aggressive, but that was the reason that I was choosing the 22nd. It was to get ahead of those dates.
I also think we should have the appearance of being rushed.
Yeah, I'm only one of
I feel
13,
like
so
we-
I want to
People
hear
will
from
reject
everybody
it Just
else.
because we're rushed. Because it was
Whoever's
rushed after.
speaking in the public section, your voices carry up here and we can't hear each other. So if you need to talk, could you please step out of the room? Thank you. So, okay.
So Melissa, are you against going into January?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't want to go much further than January because then we're almost into spring and you already heard Paul's timeline. So, I mean, it's not as if we're pushing into January, then we're already pushing out until late next summer to actually get things going out here. So I just want to make sure that the ball's moving forward. I want to put a date out there that's so far forward that things don't happen in the interim. I have found that setting a date, even if it's a high expectation, actually gets things done. And if we set it too far out, then people idle and then it doesn't get done and then we extend that date. So I just don't want to put it out so far that things don't get done, that's all. So I'd be happy to pick another date. I just don't want to put it so far out that things aren't moving forward. I agree that it doesn't have to be rushed, to Nan's point.
I mean, the bulk of the work is on the planning board.
Right.
So I don't want to pick a date for you. Tim, are you having thoughts there? Or?
It's going to be Wednesday, and
Yeah,
there are only so many Wednesdays.
Go ahead,
We've
Tim.
already
I
got
was
two
just
of them
gonna
for regulars.
I was just gonna suggest as well that, I mean, I'd hate to rush it because then I think, then the public thinks we're trying to push something through, so. And I do agree with Melissa, I think we need to have a good target date, but if it does have to be extended, then it has to be extended. So, can we pick a date and let's get it going?
Can we maybe pick the last Wednesday in October and make that the noticed date for hearing? And then if we have to push it, we have to push it.
Okay.
So what you're saying is that we go out now and notice that we will have a hearing at the end of October for a document that hasn't yet been created, such that once people see the notice, they go to get the document and see it and find out it doesn't exist?
That's a
I don't
problem.
think that's a good idea.
What would you suggest then, Nancy?
I think that we're trying to push this way too fast.
I think
No, that's exactly what we're discussing. So what would you suggest then that would work?
I would say that we should set a goal to have the warrant article language stable by the end of October. But I certainly don't think that we should be noticing it now without having a document.
Okay, then set some proposed dates. Let's talk with Melissa and let's move it forward. What do you think for a date, Nancy?
Tim, I don't have a calendar in front of me, so I really can't do that.
Okay, I can give you some, are you looking at the end of October?
But Tim,
Are you
this is,
thinking November? Yeah,
Tim, this is Mike Walsh. So
yes.
I agree with Nancy. I think we should see the article. I think we should discuss it as a board in one of our meetings. And then I think we should put the notice out to have the public come to the following meeting and discuss it. I think setting it out right now, you're setting it for failure. You're setting it up for failure.
Well,
I think
we're
it's-
setting a date. What would you propose then?
So
we
Tim,
would- so the 27th, have the public meeting, but the 13th, the planning board needs to review the final article document.
Okay,
in
that
our
works.
meeting.
That's
And what do we
fine.
need, 14 days for public notice for a public hearing? So,
Guys, go back to the concept that this is iterative and that we're going to be going back and forth on the content of this document, not just within the planning board, but with the applicant, because there's no sense in us coming up with revised language if they're not buying into it. So this is
Right.
going to be essentially contract negotiations. And I'll be surprised if this goes back and forth less than 5 times.
So would you not set a date, or what would you think we should do then for this?
How about we have a work session next week ourselves?
Yep.
Yeah.
Evan, were you going to
Brief
offer
one.
something?
I mean, I think we need to understand how much work it's going to take before we can start setting schedules.
Okay, that sounds fair.
Evan?
I was just going to try to provide some perspective, obviously not speaking for the developer, but my understanding of this process to date is that they've presented multiple times, so the concept as to what they're presenting, as far as they're concerned, has been pretty consistent. I don't get the sense that there's a lot more to negotiate. So if an iterative process results in a substantial, significant change in concept, I'm not sure that's, they can clarify, but I think if you have a chance to review the draft zoning overlay in the development agreement, it reflects exactly what's been presented as a project. So I think, from my perspective, similar to planning board applicability, I don't think they're entering into an iterative negotiation. I think they're trying to hammer out pretty straightforward zoning and development agreement that reflects what they want to build. If you guys collectively aren't interested in what they're proposing to build, again, I would encourage you to tell them or anyone else sooner rather than later. Try to negotiate a project through drafting zoning, I think we're kind of beyond that. So best example is the bylaw and development agreement contemplate 15% affordability. There's been no talk about affordability this evening. What that says to me is people are satisfied, assuming they understand that it's 15%. If that was of concern, I think we would hope collectively that would have been expressed this evening, because that may be a substantial project change that they need to go back to the drawing board. So I think before you would decide on a process, I think, in my opinion, you should have some clear indication as to where the developer thinks they are in this process. Because I think the worst case is you're entering into a process where the planning board has a different thought or strategy or vision as to what the purpose of that process is. Thank you.
And I don't want to put the planning board on the spot, Madam Chair, but what we could do, if the planning board wants to have a discussion, not in the joint board setting, is that we could go to the planning board meeting that's already scheduled for the 13th and have just that discussion as to the actual development itself, because Evan's absolutely right. This is what we're proposing. We've crafted a development agreement around it. We've crafted a bylaw about it. So if either of these boards don't have a feeling that this is not something they want to move forward with, and that's something we would want to know before we get too much further in the process, because there's no reason to go to town meeting with something or to start going towards town meeting if the planning board or the board of selectmen is going to say this is not something we want to put our efforts into, or if they want to change the overall development to be something completely different.
What I would suggest is that we do like a work session, we come in a little bit early.
Yeah.
What about the 6th? Come in to the work.
Can you guys get to the microphones, because Chelmsford telling me he's not picking you up.
So, all right, I just heard the 6th. Anybody interested in having a work session on this?
Yeah.
I think the sooner the better.
Yeah,
Work session, planning.
work session.
Is that all right with you, Tim?
Yeah, the 6th Should work.
That all right with you,
Yep.
Melissa? Is that all right with you,
Yes,
Melissa?
October 6th at
6:30?
Yeah, 6:30 is what your work sessions usually are.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And then after the October 6th work session, would we then go to the, I'm sorry, I'm getting lost in all the schedules now, the Board of Selectmen meeting on the
We don't meet again until the 25th.
The 25th, okay, so we'd have the 6th.
Unless you got it.
We'd have the 6th and the 13th unless we scheduled another joint boards meeting after that 6th meeting.
Yep.
Or unless the Board of Selectmen already has another specially scheduled meeting that we could put this before.
Or they could come to our meeting.
What were the 2 dates we were looking? 19th it's gonna be?
That's what we're looking for, the 19th or the 20th.
The 19th or the 20th is when we're looking at
I
schedule.
couldn't make it the 20th.
Okay, so I guess we're still working on confirming, but we were looking at the 19th or the 20th. It looks like it's maybe the 19th.
Looking at that for what?
We have to schedule a special meeting to get something that's time-sensitive done.
Right.
Well, could
So-
you guys come to our meeting on
Well,
the?
no, so what we're saying is that if we have that
We have
meeting, it would be
something else.
another opportunity to piggyback one more agenda item as long as we're together.
Yes. So if the planning board could do a work session on the 6th, we would have another discussion on the 13th. And then if the planning board could also come to that special meeting on the 19th with the Board of Selectmen, we could have a joint discussion again, and then discuss the timeline and see where we are with the development. And then start setting outside dates if we have some sort of agreement in place.
Paul, is that setting better with you?
Yes.
The answer was yes.
What time is the meeting on the 19th?
I think she was asking for 6 o'clock, but we have other business to do, so you wouldn't have to be there at 6.
Right, we would,
Yeah, I have a 5 o'clock meeting, but.
we would have that, we would have that license hearing scheduled on the 19th, so that would take at least a half hour, Nancy, so I think we wouldn't get to this till at least 6:30 on the 19th, so that, I know that 6:30 is like the early time for the planning board, but it wouldn't be
Yeah.
before then.
Paul Haverty, are you have
I just wanted to
any-
ask if my attendance was wanted at any of these meetings. I'm guessing it's probably yes, but I,
Probably yes.
What do you think, Tim?
And let me just, before we go to that, because I just want to, does the select board want to just have a quick agenda item or an agenda item this Monday so that we can ask town council any questions that we have regarding this process after reflecting from the meeting and
I mean,
looking at the
if
content?
if you have it as an agenda item and not much discussion comes out of it, that's fine. I'd rather put it on the agenda and then not use it and then
All right,
not be able
so-
to discuss it.
So we'll add that to the agenda that's being published on Thursday, and I can just say, yes, I would like you at that meeting.
Even if it's just a place card holder.
well, I
Right.
think I'm going to be there for the executive
Right, so
session
we'll
at
put
the
it
end
towards
anyways.
the
Yes, I'll
end.
put it towards the end.
Planning board, do you want Paul Haverty at your? I would say yes on the
Yeah.
19th,
Yeah.
since that's when
I
we're coming
think
so.
together.
I think so.
Yes.
At
Yeah,
our work session or at the
Yeah.
regular
Yeah.
meeting or both?
At our work
at the work
session.
at least.
Well, at least at the work session, and then make a decision there whether we need him at the next meeting.
Okay.
Agreed.
Sorry.
No, that's good. I'm available both days.
And the 19th, we'll need you back.
I put the 19th in.
Okay.
Okay.
So Melissa and Mark, does your team have anything more at this point?
No, I think we look forward to getting some input, having this work session with the planning board. I appreciate, that's a lot of scheduled meetings, so I appreciate both of these boards putting the time and energy in, especially in October when I know you have another town meeting, so I appreciate that.
Okay. Anything more from the planning board members in the Zoom room? You guys good?
No, nothing. Thank you.
Anything
I'm good,
more
thank
from
you.
people at the table? Paul or Evan? No?
You okay?
Right for you.
She's waiting for a motion, I think.
Motion to resign? No.
Yes.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second at 8:49 PM. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. 13-0.